this is a human fundamental bentness we have towards idolatry. And by idolatry, I mean putting any other good value, identity, being higher than the identity being good that we've been given by God. So it's replacing God in our lives in some way. And I really do believe that partisan idolatry is one of the great ills facing Christians on the left and on the right, where we have allowed some partisan identity and loyalty to actually supplant our higher loyalty in Jesus, ultimately, as our Lord.
Welcome to Religion Unmuted, where we explore how religion is lived. I'm your host, Rachel Schneider, a religion scholar and director of the Religion and Public Life Center at Rice University. Today, we're going to be talking about religion and today's political landscape, as well as the impact on mental health and hope for the future. Our guest is Curtis Chang. Curtis wears many hats, and we're going to delve into the specifics more deeply in just a few minutes. But to name just a few, he is the founder and CEO of Consulting Within Reach, a firm serving nonprofits and government agencies. He teaches strategic planning as a faculty member of American University's School of International Service. And he is a consulting professor at Duke Divinity School and senior fellow at Fuller Theological Seminary. He is the author of 2 recent books, The After Party Towards Better Christian Politics with Nancy French, and The Anxiety Opportunity, How Worry is the Doorway to Your Best Self. Thank you so much for joining us, Curtis.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're someone who has worked across a number of different domains. So can you go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit about the work that you do?
Well, it is seemingly hard to categorize. I have a hard time introducing myself sometimes exactly what you do. And maybe one way to think about this is that I've had multiple careers. So I've had a career in the faith world, first as a campus minister, then as a senior pastor of a church, and currently really also invested very heavily in that faith-facing work. But I've also had another past career working with secular institutions, running a consulting firm, like you said. And I think my current career right now is really trying to bridge those two worlds, the world of the faith-facing world and the world of secular culture and institutions, realizing that our faith, or the Christian faith, my faith in particular, it really calls us to engage with the world. It is certainly an interior faith. It has to do with the meanings of our own individual private lives, but it's so much more than that. And this is where I hope to bring my experience and my sense of importance of the secular world and secular institutions. And I'm really interested where our faith brings us into contact, hopefully in a good way, sometimes not always, but hopefully in a good way, in terms of how we contribute, how we engage, but also how we're shaped by the broader secular world.
In your books, you talk about how you have made this pivot to a more public-facing and visible role in the world as claiming the identity of evangelical, and how there was a bit of a sense of closeting in your kind of secular nonprofit work and being in the Bay Area. So what has that been like for you to move into that space and to occupy that space of really embodying religion in public life?
Yeah. So I have gay friends, and I've asked them, can I use the term closet evangelical? Is that okay? They've given me their blessing. Because when I describe to them what it's like to be an evangelical in the Bay Area, especially the Bay Area nonprofit world where my consulting firm and work happens, being evangelical is something like you have to be very careful about how much you are out yourself, so to speak, with that identity. And because especially in the most recent decade or so, where the term evangelical has become so conflated with a partisan political identity, that is very much, out of step, I think, with the dominant culture, at least in the Bay Area. That I've always had this, kind of, as long as I've lived there, this uncertain and ambivalent relationship with that term. And that changed for me on January 6th, when I saw with horror the insurrection at the Capitol that was in so many ways primed by religious communities that also were claiming the title evangelical. You saw the Jesus Saves signs, the cross being paraded. And if you know anything about that and the reporting around that event, the conservative Christian faith that many would at least label as evangelical really was implicated in what happened in the events leading up to that. And I looked at horror with that. And when I was watching those scenes on my TV, I had this phrase that started to echo in my head that I don't know if it was with me, coming from God. I don't usually try to make such a clear distinction between those two if I believe God dwells within me. But the phrase was this. It was, we're the adults now. Like, we're the adults now. And as I reflected on what was the meaning behind that wording, that phrasing, I realized that, for me, the term adults is this, like, they're the people responsible for the house. And in particular, I realized with the ways that I've been essentially shirking the identity evangelical, I was letting somebody else, I was letting the quote unquote adults take care of the evangelical house. And so that I could stay, that's sort of what teenagers do. They're there for themselves, essentially. They're not caring about the entire house, about the foundations or the roof or something like that. And so I realized that my sort of ability to stay in the closet, again, I'm using air quotes around that, in terms of being quiet about my faith in the public realm, I was just saying, well, somebody else will take care of the state of evangelicalism. And January 6th brought home to me that as a 50-year-old male, I'm an adult now. Like, this is my house. And if I'm going to have a sense of calling in the world, I can't just say, well, somebody else will take care of the ills that has led the sort of evangelical identity to become hijacked in this moment. And that was for me a key moment of calling, saying, well, I'm the adult now. I'm of the generation that I need to actually take care of this community, of this faith identity, such that future generations can inherit something good and worth inheriting. And so that was the moment.
In your book, The After Party, you begin the book with a really powerful story of relational estrangement and healing that had really come about over differences in politics. And I was just so struck by that story because I think it mirrors the story of many, many people. I would be lying if I'd said that my relational bonds have not been strained with the last few years. I've spoken before on this podcast about, my background and growing up in a conservative white evangelical household and really being shattered with January 6th was at least one of those events, but really, even before that, really shattered by, I guess maybe I trusted the people to have the house and hold the house and all of the rest. And so I am really grateful for people who are speaking out and really reclaiming the core values and virtues that I know to be the best of evangelicalism. So I really want to thank you for that. So why did you start there? And what are you telling people about how to navigate these really painful divides that have emerged in our country, and particularly around faith and politics?
I began the book with the story of shattered relationships that you use the word betrayal that you felt. I mean, if you read that story, there's a profound sense of betrayal on multiple levels. That's a story of a couple who are friends of mine. So it's a real life story, my generation, and really struggling with their relationship with their parents, in particular with one point of contact is the younger woman struggling with the in-law parents.
Yeah.
And it's, my friends would probably lean progressive in their politics, although they're not in it by any means like hardcore partisans. And the Trump years was very painful years for their relationship, especially in the in-law relationship. The woman is a Japanese American, somebody whose own mom was born in a concentration camp. And so to hear some of the attitudes about race, about immigration coming from her in-laws was really painful for her.
Yeah.
So that's one example of what would be millions of examples, I think, across our country of where partisan, sort of identities and loyalties have profoundly divided families, churches, communities, organizations. And so I wanted to have that big picture of what's happening in our country sort of coalesced and focused into a very human, accessible example, because that's really where the pain is. It's easy to get focused on the headlines about the political, dynamics of the election that happened or something else, or the new policies that will happen. But we forget also that there's real cost happening at the relational level. And I think it's important to at least anchor there in some way, because actually that's where the part of our lives that actually motivates us, I think, most to change. If we're thinking about just something happening out there, we can get all riled up and upset and agitated. But in reality, the vast majority of what you read on the headlines or in the social media feeds does not actually touch our lives at the parts of our daily lives, our relationships, the people we love, that love us, that care for us. It's in that intimate sphere that most motivates us, I think, for a chance to reflection and potentially change towards something the better.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up partisan idolatry. What are some of the aspects of partisan idolatry that you're most concerned by in this moment? You're a public theologian. What is your call?
Well, I find the biblical category of idolatry very helpful in, every age. The Bible makes it clear this is a human fundamental bentness we have towards idolatry. And by idolatry, I mean putting any other good value, identity, being higher than the identity that we've been given by God. So it's replacing God in our lives in some way. And I really do believe that partisan idolatry is one of the great ills facing Christians on the left and on the right, where we have allowed some partisan identity and loyalty to actually supplant our higher loyalty in Jesus, ultimately, as our Lord. And so one sign of when we have fallen into partisan idolatry, I think, is in our relationships. I think our relationships, especially relationships where there are difference, are like the canary in the coal mine. If we are experiencing division, hostility, that's an early warning sign that some other identity has taken hold. And this is why I wrote the book, was to try to articulate ways in which, regardless of what you believe and the substantive issues of politics, that it is still possible to fall into idolatry, and that will really most readily manifest itself in the relationships we have with people, especially the relationships we have with people who think differently than us.
I really appreciated in the after party how you talked about really two virtues, hope and humility, and how both are really critical. And I agree, for our democracy, for people of faith, and for anyone, I think, who really wants to make a change in the world for the better. Yeah. Talk about how those virtues have played a role in your life and what you are wrestling with in this current moment as it relates to hope and humility.
Yeah. Well, the after party really is built on these two transcendent virtues that I believe are foundational for any Christian in approaching life, but especially political life. And the reason for that is because we're all called to be disciples. And I define a disciple as somebody who is high in both humility and hope. So a disciple is high in humility because a disciple is a learner. That's what a disciple means, which means I currently do not know everything. Which means
I might get it wrong.
I might get it wrong. I will get it wrong.
Right.
In fact, I know currently I've gotten some things wrong. That's why I need to learn. I don't have it all down. That's why I'm a disciple. But a disciple is also hopeful because the disciple says, I have a discipler, I have a teacher, I have a rabbi, I found somebody who can teach me over time more and more of the true, the good, and the beautiful. And so the disciple also is really filled with hope, right? Because they follow a master. Now, if you think about the exact opposite of that, somebody who's low in hope and low in humility, that actually describes a cynic. So a cynic is somebody who thinks they know better than everybody else. So they're the ones who've, leaning back with arms crossed, eyebrows slightly raised, in critical evaluation of everyone else, thinking they know better. So they're low in humility. And the thing they know, they think they've got a handle on better than anybody else as a cynic, is that everything is hopeless. That, all of what you guys are trying to do in this world, it's all never going to work.
Right.
So the reason why I describe that is because you asked me, well, how does the virtues of hope and humility come into play for me? I'm the cynic. That actually describes me. Some people don't recognize, think, oh, Curtis, you're a nice guy. You seem, generally upbeat. It's like, well, actually, that disguises a deep cynicism, especially when it comes to politics.
Right.
So I did this work with David French and Russell Moore, and they are more well known in the political world, much more so than I am. I'm a latecomer, like I said, really since January 6th was sort of, I would mark as a key moment. For much of my adult life, I stayed out of politics because I was so deeply, deeply cynical about politics. I thought, this is all hopeless. You're even to David, I thought, all right, go for it. But, it's not going to go anywhere good. And so this is a path of repent for me to engage in politics the way I have, to write the book, to be involved and lead the after party work. It's a spiritual growth step for me because I am deeply tempted to just write the whole thing off and say, just do something else. This whole political thing is worthless.
Yeah.
And so this is a spiritual growth for me. I'm trying to become more of a disciple.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of intellectually oriented people tend towards the cynic. And the cynic it's a easy place to be at because you don't risk hoping. And for me, hope is also about believing that things can be otherwise, that they can be different than they are.
Yeah.
And sometimes hoping against hope in that regard. And can be a really challenging practice. I find myself really wrestling with that in this moment. So in your other book, The Anxiety Opportunity, you talk a lot about anxiety. And I think we could add in, maybe, I don't know if you would do this, but I think we can add in things like depression, very related, or other places where our own fears and anxieties really manifest in deep wounds in our lives. And you talk about how, based on your own personal experience, anxiety has really been an opportunity for spiritual growth. And you invite other people into that. And I certainly think that can apply for people who adopt a Christian framework or who don't. But I wanted to ask, what practices are you finding to be the most helpful right now in our current political moment, and those who are close to you in holding anxiety?
Yeah. Well, I'll take this on several levels. One, I think it's really important in answering this question about how can an anxiety be a helpful opportunity for spiritual growth. We have to start with, what is anxiety?
Yeah.
And anxiety, I define as it's the natural human reaction to the face of possible or real impending loss.
Absolutely.
So anxiety is the fear of some loss. And this is why it's so important to reframe anxiety not as a problem that we're supposed to make go away, but just as a human, natural, inevitable part of the human life.
I totally agree.
To be human is to experience anxiety. And the reason is because to be human is to be exposed to loss.
Absolutely.
And so if anxiety is what we experience naturally in the face of loss, of impending loss, then to be human means to be anxious, because to be human is to be mortal and to experience and to be vulnerable and to experience all possible loss. Now, the reason why I think it's important in this moment is because many people in this political moment right now, to tie our themes here, are experiencing loss, and also potentially even more impending loss. So folks who did not vote for Trump, they experienced a particular electoral loss, but many of them also fear further losses that may come down the road for people or causes they care about.
Yeah.
And so one of the key things that I talk about in the book is in order for that experience of anxiety to actually be an opportunity for spiritual growth, it's the willingness to go through it. It's not trying to push it away, to try to manage it, to talk it away, pretend it's not there. But it's actually, it's a doorway we have to be willing to go through, because otherwise we are saying, I want to avoid loss. Because if anxiety equals loss, then to say, I don't want to experience anxiety is to say, I don't want to experience loss. And that leads us into some crazy making places, because the reality is, we have, politically this outcome was a loss. You can't deny it. It's happened,
Right.
and there will be more losses, more painful losses that happen. And so we have to be willing to go through it. And my own reminder of this often comes in my experience as a parent, because one of the things that makes me most anxious in my personal life is when my daughters are experiencing loss, and that makes me feel bad. That makes me feel anxious. So I don't want them to feel lost. So what I often do is I try to talk them. This is the bad parenting advice is I try to talk them out of this. And say, oh no, it's not so bad.
Right.
It's not really that bad. Yeah. And they always hate it, because they realize, no, something's going on here, that you're not really going through this loss with me. You're just trying to make me not feel this. And maybe even somewhere part of them realizes, and I think it's you're doing this so that you feel better, right? So this is a constant mistake I make. My kids call this consultant dad when I slip into this mode. Well, after the election, we had a phone call, and our family was on the call, and my two daughters were very sad. They both were very worried about their future, about the future of the planet, future of women in this country. And my oldest daughter especially, interpreted the election as a loss for women.
Yeah.
And so I was really tempted to just say, well, no, honey, it's not that bad. Here's how you ought to think about the election. And then I just stopped and I realized, no, she's experiencing a loss. She's feeling anxious about that loss. For her to go through this period with a potential for spiritual growth, she has to experience it. I have to experience it. We all have to do it.
Right.
And so this is a long answer to your question, what spiritual practices are helping me. The one that I'm really trying to lean into is simply lament. It's grieving, because that actually is what it means to go through loss, to actually experience and accept the loss that is happening or is about to happen, not try to talk it away, not try to manage the situation so that you can somehow make that loss go away. It's simply to just feel the effects of it.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And grieving and lament has been a really important practice for me. And I've seen, on the networks that I'm a part of, that there's been a lot of discussion of grief and of grieving and allowing oneself to grieve and to not push through or push past. And I do think that is ultimately the practice that will lead to a greater sense of clarity and resolve for the future. I guess I want to ask about moving from grief. One thing, grief and anxiety and loss, we know that there are going to be a lot of losses, as you mentioned. And I know that people who are minorities of all different kinds or marginalized in particular ways are feeling really anxious and scared right now, in pain, and concerned about their kind of safety and belonging in our nation. And I think part of that, to go back to like the relational side of it, is to not, because you don't quite know who's with you and who's not. Yeah. And not in a like partisan way, but more in does my neighbor think that I belong? I'm an equal human being with rights and protections and that kind of thing. And I think that's just really, really challenging for a moment. And I was really struck by your collaborator, David French, who wrote after the election about, for him, the moment, calling him to, speak truth to power and protect the vulnerable. And so I don't know if I have really a question, but I'm wondering what you're reflecting on in all of that, because I think the sense of people fearing powerlessness is really real.
Yeah. I think the sense of powerless among many people is palpable. I think it's important for us to recognize when that's actual powerlessness or just a sense of more, what I would say, existential sense of powerlessness.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction.
Right, or versus actual concrete powerlessness. Because I think based on what you're saying and what I'm feeling, I think we probably both could identify as feeling powerlessness right now in the existential sense of like, oh, the world is going in a direction that we don't like and we can't seem to arrest the trajectory of large events over us. We're powerless. That's true. But in a sociological sense, we have enormous power in this world relative to the average person.
Absolutely.
And anybody listening to this podcast almost certainly should characterize themselves as somebody with genuine power. By that, I mean, you are not under immediate threat. You have some agency and resources to do things in the world, maybe not to change the trajectory of the entire country, but in your sphere, you have power. And so I think I've been starting to ask, well, in this particular moment, what am I called to do with my power? And I think this is obviously something that everybody is going to wrestle with, but I'm also trying to lean into this as a real invitation and opportunity. That wouldn't be true in other cases. So, but I'll give this example. When I read books from history about people I really admire, heroes, I read them with a sense of, as an invitation for spiritual reflection and growth, with the question, would I do the same? So what would I have done in that moment? So Diary of Anne Frank, for example, wonderful story of courage of Anne Frank. There's the kind of haunting question I have when I read a book, which is, what would I have done in that situation if I were in a position of relative power to Anne Frank, right? If I were a Dutch family? What if I were like the Gieps, Jan and Miep Giep, who was the family that actually sheltered Anne Frank, and Miep Gies was the one who preserved Anne's diary and actually made it available for future generations, right? Dutch Catholics. And I think I and my wife are very actively in the process of, we don't know what's going to happen, but whatever happens, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
And that has raised what is our version of being the Geeps for Anne Frank? And again, it's not a one-to-one correlation. I'm not trying to make it a one-to-one like we are now living in the equivalent of Nazi Germany, but there are parallels, or at least lessons or things that we need to reflect on when people we care for, that we're in relationship with, are under threat, and under threat unjustly, again, depending on how you evaluate particular situations. What is our responsibility, and how do we wield the power? My wife and I, we have tremendous power relative to those people who are under threat. We have a guest house, we have money, we have resources. Right. This is a moment for us to reflect on that.
Yeah.
And I actually think that's an opportunity, because think in most what you would call normal, stable situations where we don't feel like, oh my gosh, something awful is happening, the way that some people may feel right now. That also means that you don't actually have the opportunity to find out what's in you, and to cultivate more what perhaps should be in you, what God is calling forth in you, like courage, like the willingness to protect the vulnerable in the way the Geeps had to do. And so, again, long-winded answer to your question, which is, in this moment, I'm trying to discern, what does this moment mean for me to act in a way that I've always hoped I would act, and I'm going to get to find out. It's going to be a moment of testing, and I think everybody has their version of that, whatever that looks like, and it's going to look differently for different people. But this is the moment, if you're feeling like powerless, to recognize, if you're listening to this, you're actually not powerless. What are you going to do with your power is the question.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. I had very similar conversations with my spouse the day after the election, because I recognize my relative power and privilege, and what is the responsibility that comes with that in this moment. I do really appreciate how you're thinking about it and how you're talking about it. Thank you so much, Curtis. You have really shared your wisdom with us, and I really wish you well in all of your work and all of the spheres that you have influence.
Thank you. You too, Rachel.
That's it for this episode of Religion Unmuted. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe to, rate, and review us wherever you listen. And my special thanks to our guest, Curtis Chang. Today's show was written by myself, Elaine Howard-Eklund, and Haley Hemstreet. Our series is produced by Three Wire Creative. Religion Unmuted is a joint venture of the Boniek Institute and the Religion and Public Life Center at Rice University. Until next time.